بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد الفاتح لما أغلق والخاتم لما سبق ناصر الحق بالحق والهادي إلى صراطك المستقيم وعلى آله حق قدره ومقداره العظيم الحمد لله. You know, before I start, do you have a pen? I forgot to. Thank you so much. Alhamdulillah. So yeah, we're starting off kind of cold because we don't know each other. So it's probably a good idea for me to say something about myself, so that way it's not just based on assumptions. I'm an American. I grew up in Georgia, in the east coast, southeast of the United States. Thank you so much. And then I became a Muslim when I was 20. So that means that, you know, for the first 20 years of my life, I didn't know. I wasn't aware of God's name, for example. I didn't know basic. I mean, I'm sorry if this sounds raw to you, but I didn't know basic hygiene. I don't want to go too far into that. What that means. I just didn't. We didn't have these things. So I remember as a child, I asked my father, "What is God's name?" When I was 6 years old, and I asked him, "What's God's name?" And that was the first time I remember my father not knowing an answer. When you're a kid, you ask your parents stuff because they know everything. So at 6, I said, "What is God's name?" And I just saw him stunned, because I don't think most 6-year-olds ask questions. I mean, for us as Muslims, we always say Allah. But as a kid, God's name is God, which is pretty generic. You know, it's like, what's the name of this car? And someone tells you, "Oh, it's car." You're not gonna accept that. No, like, there's a lot of cars. What is the name of this specific car? And they say, "No, it's car." No one's gonna accept that. So I, as a 6-year-old, I couldn't understand why God was just called God and why God didn't have a name. I have a name. You have a name. This car has a name, but God doesn't have a name. So I think that was the beginning of an internal crisis. Like 6. I'm like, my dad doesn't know everything. Oh no. And then secondly, that seems like a pretty important thing to know. So anyway, some 14 years later, I found myself embracing Islam for multiple reasons. And then I did what most people would probably do. I took Islam on, well, not everyone does this, but I know that I did. I took Islam on completely and entirely. But there was no one there to show me how to do that. So, you know, when you go to the mosque sometimes and you see converts, like the convert has like a shawar kameez, a Turkish hat, a Saudi, like, we just bring the whole thing together because this is Muslimic. We just bring it all together and we change our names, we do all this because that's what we're supposed to do. That's what we're told. And it gets even more, maybe it gets almost sinister, because I remember very, very vividly an Arab guy. I befriended this Arab guy because he was from the Gulf, and I figured, you know, he speaks the language, so he must know. He said to me, we were driving in the car one day, a conversation that had so many avenues of so many interesting twists and turns. But one of the things that he said to me was, you know, subhanallah, like, you know, we Arabs were amazed by you. I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "You know, you became a Muslim." I said, "Yeah, alhamdulillah." He goes, "No, because you're the sons of shaitan, and you became Muslim." And I was like, I mean, well, how's that going to make you feel about yourself? You know, I speak English. My mother tongue is English. My mother spoke to me in English, and I was raised in a church, and I had a certain worldview. I was taught that Russians are evil people. You know, I was born in '75, so by 1984 or 5, forget it. Russians are actually, they're not human. You know, like we were so inundated. Now it's the Muslims aren't human. You know, they just have a different target now. Like I'm like, I've seen this before, you know. But what I'm trying to get, my point I'm trying to get at is I had to go through a period of time where I had to figure out what it means to be a Muslim. What does that even mean? And I found that it really wasn't kind of as simple, or it was as simple as I thought, depending on the different topics. But I had to kind of go through this process of figuring out what it means to be a Muslim, especially when 9/11 happened. The reason why I'm sitting here in this chair actually is because when 9/11 occurred, I hadn't been educated in Islam really. I knew how to read and such. I was much younger, and someone asked me, "Are you a Muslim or are you an American?" It was almost, it wasn't like that was the question, but that was the intent. And I'd never thought of such I had to choose. And I didn't, it really bothered me. And also bothered me that I couldn't answer the questions about the internal questions. Would the Prophet, peace be upon him, would he be pleased with this action? According to one group in the mosque, yes, entirely. And they have it coming. Okay. So for me, I'm like, so those mothers and fathers and young people looking forward to their future, jumping out of a building at, 30 flights up or whatever it is, 100 flights up or whatever it is. What did they do? And there was a musalla. There were musallas in the World Trade Center. There were Muslims praying there. What did they do? Who had what coming? Well, it's collateral damage because you have to, all this kind of stuff. I was really bothered by that. So again, I have to figure out, what is Islam? What am I? I believe this is true. I have faith in this. But then when I started thinking about it, what is it that I have faith in? Exactly. That I have this new identity? That I'm the funny guy in the mosque with I'm a collaboration of cultural expressions in one individual. No one can figure out what I am. Is that what I am? Is that what I've changed my life completely? I've become this new thing. Is that all that it is? Did I become Muslim to make sure that I can have biryani every night? Or that I have special access to the Farsi-speaking world? Is it any deeper than that? So for me, I think coming to this point and sitting here today, a lot of it has had to do with, I think, some of the questions that we probably have. Let me put it in a different way. I think some of the questions that you either have about your children or probably should be having about your children are questions that I had to ask about myself as an adult and I'm still having to ask. And that is, it kind of seems to stem from a simple question, and that is Islam an identity? Is Islam an identity? Sure, I might identify as a Muslim, but is Islam an identity? And if Islam is not an identity, perhaps, what is it? And if it isn't, and I'm a Muslim, then what is my identity? What does it mean for me to be a Muslim? Is it simply I can leave from the country I came from and go to another country and just superimpose what that's meant to me my whole life? Or does it mean that, for example, last night I was speaking to someone here, and they were like, they're Farsi speaking, obviously as well as Swedish and English. And I asked them, because yeah, I was born here. So I go, oh, so you're Swede? And he's like, kind of. He said, this is not like America where everybody's just included in the melting pot. That's a question that most of you, or some of you, I can probably tell by your age and other things, that you're not really going to ask yourself these questions because you've taken many things for granted. But these are questions that your children are going to have to take on. And they are taking on. And some of them, is Islam an identity, is a question that is answered by some of them saying, yes, and I don't relate to that. So they're not leaving Islam, which is what's happening in a lot of cases. They're leaving an identity they don't recognize. They say, no, I'm Swedish. But maybe this is a false universal. Maybe we're not looking at the question in the right way. Maybe that's not how this should be framed. Does that make sense? Are we all, like, I'm the only one talking so far. Hopefully I'll provoke you enough to where you'll say something. But so far, do you understand kind of what I'm working with? The question is Islam an identity? And can we simply say yes or no about that? So I will ask you now, and if we come to a conclusion that's different than yours, that doesn't mean that you're wrong per se. It just means that these are questions I think that need to be asked, because they're multifaceted, and they are inevitable. I think part of the reason why you are suffering from this rise in violence, like here it's guns, and in the UK it's knife crimes. Part of the reason why the youth are turning on each other and shooting each other is because this question about is Islam an identity? So before we get into it, what do you think? Let's just start with, yeah. Is Islam, again, what's the question? This guy talks too much. Is Islam an identity? Yes.
There are two ways of this picture.
So before answering the question, you're like, no, we should probably look at it from both sides, what you think you are and what others say you are.
Yeah, and then
fair enough.
To balance that one.
Fair enough. Okay. I think that's probably going to come in. I think you've deliberately introduced that, but I hope that was going to come up. Yeah. But before we add further dimensions, I'm like, okay, but is Islam an identity? I think that question has to be whether you identify or you're identified by yourself or by others. Is Islam an identity, though?
Yes, I think so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can I have your argument, sir?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's say in Sweden, if you're a Muslim, then you're identified as a Muslim. For example, like in my example, in office, everyone knows people are working around me that I'm a Muslim. I don't know about their religion, or I never ask them who they are, but they know me.
Yeah.
So I'm identified by them as a Muslim because I don't eat like other than halal, and I pray and so on. So they identify me as a Muslim. Yeah, I would say that it's an.
So you're kind of mentioning also what he said. He's like, well, other people are calling you that thing. So whether you do or do not, or whether Islam is or is not, is irrelevant, because that's how you are identified in the community. But what I would say about that is, could that change if they were more aware of the nuances of things? So in other words, like, we don't really embrace the larger community probably in the way that we do for them to be able to recognize nuance, such that they just have a blanket. So for example, in the South, like I said, I'm from Georgia. So growing up, it was like, when I think about it, man, it's ridiculous. Like, if you were from the south of the border, you were a Mexican. You're like, no, I'm Venezuelan. You're like, yeah, Mexico. If you looked a certain way or spoke a certain language, you're Chinese. And they're like, no, it's Taiwan. You're like, oh, well, still Chinese. It's not very nuanced. You know what I mean? So, but I want to come back to that. But you are saying yes, Islam is an identity, but because of how other people identify you with it. Okay, that's important.
Yeah, to connect to that, I mean, why we're having this discussion at all? I think it's important when you meet other people who have a different way of life. So I would imagine if, okay, there may not have been like a totally isolated Muslim community who don't know anything around them, but in a Muslim majority environment, you would eat food. You wouldn't eat halal food. Like, I don't think they would even reflect going to their lunches, thinking that they're gonna eat halal food. It's just food, because all food is served.
It's the default.
Yeah.
Huh.
So you don't have to think about it, am I Muslim or not? Is my Muslim identity, is that something really? But
So-
when
so,
you
again, yeah.
when you have the now, you can choose to have the halal food or you can have the haram food.
Uh-huh.
Then it also became an identity because someone will ask you, why are you eating this?
So are we identified by our dietary?
No, but it was just an example. It's everything, maybe the clothing,
So if
why
I
is the hijab is such a big thing?
Mhm. So if a woman doesn't wear hijab, she's not a Muslim.
No,
So-
it becomes a thing when someone else don't do it.
Oh no, I get you. No, I think I feel like I completely understand how the others would box you and categorize you by certain external expressions. But what I'm saying is that, but when we start to pick at that, does it work? So for example, there are some Muslims who eat pork. There are some Muslims who drink alcohol. There are some Muslims who dress differently than maybe people in the Middle East. But they're still Muslims, right? So does that work?
Not theologically, it doesn't work.
Like theologically or theoretically?
No, theologically.
Theologically?
Yeah, it doesn't work.
How-
But sociologically.
No, but theologically, why doesn't it work? So, for example, if someone eats pork, are they not a Muslim anymore?
Sorry.
If someone, that's why I asked you the distinction between theological and theoretical. If someone doesn't eat pork, or if someone eats pork, does that make them not Muslim anymore?
No, not pork.
If someone drinks wine, does that make them sort of now they're a Buddhist or something, or an atheist? No, I don't think so. So, again, that we allow others to define us, I'm saying, but even their definitions doesn't really work. You know, a Muslim is not simply. I like where this is going, though. I like it, but I understand. Again, so
No,
we're.
I agree with you 100%.
Yeah, yeah.
But,
Yeah. So what we're doing is that we're still talking about how others define us. We haven't really.
Okay.
Brother.
Yeah, I think. Are we talking about how we are identifying, or is Islam really a identity?
So now you see. So I'm saying, if you notice, all I'm doing is just searching, and with our expressions, we're exposing a bit of what we feel and what we think. But now I'm saying, okay, back up again. I asked the question: is Islam an identity? And now we're talking about Muslim identity. That's not my question. I said, is Islam an identity? So we have to back up now. Is Islam an identity? Yes or no? And if Islam is an identity, can we identify it? What does it look like? What does it sound like? And who owns it? So for me, what I had to do was, I believe in Allah and I believe in His Messenger Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and I'm like, I'm going for this. But there was no, because there was no Islam as well, let me not put it, I'll give away my punchline or whatever you want to call it if I say that too fast. I saw the Muslims and I thought, I'm gonna be you, because that's Islam. And what I found was that, there's a lot of yous. And here I'm reflecting that. You know, I have my personal proclivity was towards the Moroccan jilbab. I like that one. But then you realize Jewish Moroccans also wore jilbab. Oh. And then when I was hit with more difficult questions in 9/11, I realized, oh wow, now I'm being asked about me. Is Islam an identity? You seem like you seemed provoked.
No, I was just thinking. I'm enraged. No, I'm just kidding.
He said I'm enraged.
I'm holding it.
Yeah.
No, I was just thinking, because the question of identity we often go into practice, if Islam in itself is it. And I think Islam always is it's always in a context within different cultural contexts. So it's always, and as a Muslim, you have several identities working together. So in that sense, looking at Islam, there's quite few practices that are fard out of all that are made. So in my sense, if you say an Islamic identity is also as much defined as from a perspective than a practice. It is the searching of always interpreting from what time and context you are in, always having how do I interpret this from the teachings.
Yeah.
So that is having that perspective is I think one of the parts of identity.
So you were making a clear distinction between the context wherein Islam is found, Islam itself, and the Muslims who practice it. Is that kind of what you're doing?
Yeah.
More or less?
Yeah.
See, that rage is serious. Like, he came out fighting. What's wrong with Right. So let's come back to earth. Again, is Islam an identity, or is Islam a culture? Or how does the grammar work? Are Islam and Muslims the same? Does that work? Is Islam and Muslims the same? Are Islam? Well, is it is? I don't know. English is weird. يعني هل الإسلام والمسلمين يعني المسلمون يعني على سواء? Is it the same? Are Muslims and Islam, is it the same thing? And I think we need to stop and just kind of say no. I hope not. Because if it's the same, then whatever Muslims do is whatever Islam is, and that's not going to work. It really isn't. And that's kind of where I was going. So I think we can take the whole project of what they identify us and what we identify ourselves. I think we need to put it to the side, because I think we're asking a different question, and that is Islam and Muslims the same word? And I think the answer is no.
Yes, there is answer is no.
Okay, so now let's move to the next leg. Islam is one thing, and a Muslim is something else. Obviously, there's a relationship between the terms, but they're not the same thing. When we are asking about our children, or when we are asking about ourselves, are we making this distinction? When I'm saying I want my child to stay Muslim, are we saying, and I don't mean just here, I mean the Swedish project. Am I saying I want my child to stay Pakistani? I want my child to stay Turkish. I want my child to stay whatever it is. Is that what I'm asking? What preservation am I trying to do here? Or am I saying I want my child and my grandchildren and great-grandchildren to stay on Islam? Which one is it? Because it's not the same. Let me explain. And this is how I've thought about this subject from a long period of time. If I was to take this bottle, for example, this bottle is clear and the water is clear, right? Is the water, what color is the water? Huh? Yeah, it's neutral. That's why I can see through it, kind of. If the bottle was green, what color would the water be?
Green.
It'd be green. But is it actually green? No. If the bottle was blue, what color would the water be? Now, Islam is sent down as a revelation, as water. But you can't put, if I was to take some water and throw it over the side here, what would gravity do with the water? It's going to go all over the ground. It's not going to, unless a miracle happens, it's not going to land in a perfectly cylinder, like in a cylinder on the sidewalk waiting to be drunk. It's not going to happen. It has to have a container, otherwise the water is useless to me, isn't it? So, when Islam, now there's something special about the Arabs and the Prophet, peace be upon him. There's something very special about them as this sort of original container that you can never, that's why Allah raised them in the way that He did, because of that fact, there's always going to be aspects of Arab culture that are going to be part of the revelation. That's going to continue forward. It becomes part of the revelation, how he did this or how he did that, or even a lot of the sort of the rulings and the customs that they had actually became part of revelation, because you have to have some kind of container. So that's one exception to this overall rule. The Arab, sometimes these academics, they try to attack Islam and say that this is nothing but a propagation of, this is Arab fascism, and they're pressing it along everyone. And you're like, no. And the reason why is because Islam is for human beings. Islam is not for God. Islam is for the human being. So in order for Islam to appeal to the human being, it has to be in some kind of human container. Revelation is not just floating around in the skies. It had to come into a human heart. And that human heart had to speak some kind of language that another human being can understand so that the message can be conveyed. Now, when Islam goes to China, the container that holds Islam is going to be American. Chinese. When Islam goes to India, the bottle that holds the vessel that contains the water is going to be Indian. And lo and behold, after 1,000-something years, when Islam comes to Sweden, the container is going to be Swedish, so the Islam is going to look Swedish. It has to. Islam is not this sort of, at no point is Islam this sort of ideology that can just be transported as any philosophy is transported as a sort of series of ideas, pristinely jumping from place to place to place, and you need to make sure that you're on that so that you can be a Muslim. Islam is not an ideology either. Islam is not an identity, it's not an ideology. Islam is the truth. But the truth, like water, needs a container. And if you try to separate the container, so another example is like, here's the bottle. If I was to cut a hole in this bottle, what's going to happen to the water? Gravity is going to determine it's going to be all over my lap on the ground. So when we try to cut out the human element, when we try to cut out the cultures that transmit Islam, what do you mean? We just said revelation and culture are not the same. It's true, but you can never get around the human element. But you have to be able to distinguish between the two elements all the time. Otherwise you get confused. This is where the non-Muslims fail. They don't distinguish between the container and they have a problem with the whole project. They don't like the whole thing. That's because they don't understand that there's pure water. So when Islam went to China, it looks Chinese. When it goes to Tibet, it looks Tibetan. When it goes to Iran, it looks Iranian, etc., etc., etc. This is never going to change. If Sweden became another country tomorrow, and the culture changed as a result of that, Islam will be in that vessel as well. So the question we have to ask ourselves is, then what is the constant that is always found in this every constantly changing transmission? What is the constant inside of all of this, which is called Islam, which is the thing that makes up part of our identities? Sure, I'm not denying this thing that there's a relationship between my identity and my faith system. I'm not denying that. But I'm saying if you say Islam is itself an identity, now we're already off the rails. I have a container. My container is made up of the elements that it's made up of, and that's how it's going to be, and it's never going to change. That's the way it works. Now my question to you is, if Islam is not an identity, and these are two different things, your children are probably going to be speaking Swedish better than Urdu, better than Arabic, better than Farsi. And do you understand that with that transmission, they become better Swedes than they are Bulgarians or something. They're just better at being Swedish. Like last night I was walking around with these guys, and you know, at first I understood what was going on, and then the next thing you know, they're all speaking Swedish. And I'm looking at them, I'm like, one's Somali, one is from Iran, one is like sort of ethnically Swede, one is, okay, I actually didn't catch where he was from. But they're all speaking Swedish to each other, because that's how they roll. It's easier for them to speak in Swedish than probably anything else. And what comes along with that is that how it's your container is Swedish. Now the thing with these people, many of them, they just don't get it. When I was speaking to the brother and he was saying that he was born in Sweden but he didn't really identify as a Swede, it's like, but you are. It's just the definition of what it means to be Swedish has changed. There's more nuance to it now. It's not all these immigrants came here and did all this kind of stuff. No, it means that being Swedish has more nuance than it used to have. And there's nothing wrong with that, because it's happening. You can't change it. This is not like, this is not medieval times. This is not, 1800s. Sorry. If you haven't noticed, the world, anywhere you go in the world, you're going to find everybody. That's what we're doing now. So the definition of every place, every identity, every cultural manifestation has all changed. And that's just the way it is. If you don't like it, you should probably get into a time capsule and go back. If you tell someone to go back to their country, right, you go to that country, you find everybody else. Like that statement is so out of date. Like, go back to your country. I'm like, man, if I go back to Central Asia, you guys are there too. And then if I tell you to go back to your country, you're going to find me there. It's completely irrelevant statement to make, completely. Islam itself is the water. Now, how do I make sure? The question is, do I want my children to be Islam? It doesn't work like that. Do I want my children do I want my children to maintain their Pakistani heritage? I'm sorry, but after about 2 generations, that's going to be a distant memory. How do you know? Look, myself, I have, I know most people look at me and they try to figure out, where is this guy from? So here's the great mystery, right? So me, I'm a convert, sure, but like, I have history. Some of my ancestors they were on slave ships from West Africa, and they were brought to North America. They were black. When I say black, I don't mean like light-skinned North Africans. I'm talking about black. Senegalese, Gambian, Nigerian, that's it. Some of my ancestors were black. Some of them are Europeans. And I don't even know where in Africa. I did the DNA thing where you do the thing. So it's like predominantly Nigerian. When you look at me, you're like, okay. Like I wouldn't have guessed it, but predominantly Nigerian. What kind of Nigeria? I don't know. Yoruba, Igbo, maybe both. Hausa, who knows, man. Inshallah, I'm Muslim, I mean. Then it's like, okay, I'm also French. I'm Italian, and I have Irish blood as well. Then when I went into the DNA thing, I realized, oh man, it's actually more complicated. It's Iberian. Iberian, that's, Spain. Where in Spain? Portugal. Oh, and then there's like Sicily, and then there's like, it's like it gives more and more. And then I was making a joke last night. I was like, if you pay these people enough, you'll find out that you're actually from Adam. Because everybody's coming from, that's the point. Everyone's coming from the same place. If you go back far enough, wow, look at that. We're all cousins. Huh? You can't marry your cousin, That's all you're going to do. Nobody else. It's not like a different sets of family members that are originally. So, look, we have, because we're here, we have a project. Our Swedish project is like this. We have to do 2 things. We have to preserve Islam itself, and we have to develop a Sweden that is better than what it is, as far as we understand that. Which means all we have to do, we are, I mean, I'm obviously not Swedish, but I'm saying just to kind of feel like we're in the same place here. We are Swedes. That's what we are, and what that means is that our presence here is that we want it to be a better place. So we have to we have to keep the good and encourage it, and put a lid on the bad and discourage it. And it's not, what does that mean? It means don't drink alcohol, don't eat pork, try not to worship a man if you could help it, so forth and so on. That's it. Outside of that, there's no, I don't know what Swedes do. You know, I know the stereotypes, but I don't know what you guys do. But all that stuff is fine. So it's about, the project is actually not that complicated. But it will remain complicated if we don't know Islam itself. That's the problem. If we don't know the water, we can't preserve it. So what is Islam then? What is it? Everywhere you look in the Muslim world, which has now become the non-Muslim world at the same time, there is no difference anymore, guys. I don't know if you noticed this. The whole Muslim, non-Muslim dynamic is completely ridiculous. Completely. That is not, that the world is one place. We're so like cross-pollinated at this point that there's no way to go back. And you know, maybe that doesn't need to be a going back. But everywhere you go where Islam is thriving, it's thriving because of the sciences that support it. Here, mashallah, in the Roda Institute, from my understanding, you have a place where Islam itself will thrive. Why? Because the sciences, the knowledge, as the sister was pointing out before, the knowledge that supports Islam is being propagated. That's how our children are going to stay Muslim. They're going to stay Islam. How are they going to stay Islam? Because they know their tradition. What do I mean by tradition? They have access to the language of the book. They have access to the different types of knowledge which have made us such an amazing society across, like I was in Spain a few weeks ago. I mean, we lost, man. We lost big time. But do you know what was happening there? The propagation of knowledge itself. The propagation of knowledge was going on. So our roots and our basis and our thriving, our survival as Islam, I don't want to say Muslim because you see what it does. Our thriving as Islam, completely grammatically unsound, is in the knowledge base that we have, but it's going to express itself with different containers. I can go to Pakistan and still be a Muslim, but I can't be a Pakistani as such. Meaning, if I was to go to Pakistan and spend, and I met a guy like this. I met a guy about 20 years ago that had already been there about 30 years. And he went there to study. He became a Maulana. And he stayed there. He went there, studied, stayed there, and that's it. But when I spoke to him, he was like, yeah, man, how's it going? I was like, Maulana? Because he's an American. He's never going to be a Pakistani. It's never going to happen. But his Islam and again, even Islam itself, it has different interpretations. There's sound interpretations, but they're just different. Alhamdulillah for that. That we have nuance and we can bend and we can sort of like, you know, have different, it's a blessing, it's not rigid. There's rahmah and ikhtilaf, there's rahmah and the differences. Okay. So what do we do with our children? I'm like, look, if you're trying to keep your child Pakistani, if you're trying to keep your child Somali, if you're trying to keep your child, I don't know, like wherever we're from, well, I got good news for you. That's impossible. When I say good, I'm being sarcastic because you're not going to like that. It's not going to work. It's not going to work. I was talking about my heritage. Do you think I speak French? I do not. I mean, except for, do you think I speak Italian? I do not, except for some bad words my grandfather taught me, which I'm not allowed to use. That's a different story. Stereotypically Italian. I was like, Grandpa, teach me some Italian. He's like, all right. I was scarred for life. Do I speak Gaelic or Irish? No, I don't. What language do I speak? I speak the language that's spoken in the street. That's English. And if I want to learn another language, guess what language I have to base it on? English, man. So when I'm you know, in the process of trying to learn Arabic for a long period of time, I mean now, alhamdulillah, you're at a point where you can use Arabic to understand Arabic. But initially, all you have is that language of English. So I'm saying culture is the same way. The only way that your children are going to be able to advance in this society that they live in is they're going to have to be Swedish. But their Swedish is a little different than other Swedes because being Swedish also has nuance now. So you can say, you know, Swedish, Somali Swedish, or Swedish Somali. You can say it. That's fine. That's fine. It's fine. To me, the definitions expand. You're like us now. The whole world's like America. When I first got to when I first got to the UK about 5 years ago, I didn't understand the problem with Brexit. I didn't understand it at all. You know, I don't mean like economically and all that. I was just like, why do these guys hate immigrants so much? That was the scapegoat. It really wasn't about immigrants. You know, this is a political commentary. It was about capitalism. They just wanted to become better capitalists, and the EU wasn't cutting it for them. But they blamed the immigrants. And my thing when I got there was, why do these people hate Polish people so much? The Poles are out here just doing all sorts of jobs they don't want to do. I don't understand this. And I realized it's because they don't have this idea that if you come to the UK, come to England and stay for some time, you're English. They don't have that they don't have that kind of way of thinking. I was raised like that. Even though there's a lot of hypocrisy in it, I realized that, oh wow, that's actually the issue, that's what's going on. Whether we like it or not in Sweden, the same thing's happening here. The definition of what it means to be Swedish is changing because our children are being raised in Sweden. So, hey, assalamu alaikum. How's it going? Come on. No, bismillah. Hey. So, in order for us to be, okay, what was the original question? Now that we've spent some time, we've spent an hour now on that sort of deliberation, and I feel like by looking at your faces and the lack of question, that I think we're on the same page, at least in terms of the material. You might not agree, which is fine, but I think we're on the same page in terms of the material. So now I want to go back to the question that I was given. The original question was, how do we strengthen our Muslim identity in a constantly changing world? Second part, and what does faith, what kind of solutions does faith offer in troubled times? Okay, before I comment on that, I'm going to ask you. Now that we've kind of got our definitions somewhat straightened out, and we seem to be somewhat on the same page, I'm going to ask you, because you're the ones who have to do this. How do we strengthen our Muslim identity in a world that's constantly changing? So what do you think? How do I change? Now, I'm not backtracking. I'm not this whole Muslim identity thing. I'm not changing. I'm not, hey, this is it for me. This is the thing.
I actually think it's easier. It's never easy, but it's easier if you can focus on to do this Swedish Muslim thing, or Islamic thing, rather than as a second generation immigrant also trying to uphold and preserve the Algerian and all that stuff. It makes it's more complicated. So to start or to develop or to set the Swedish Islamic way for the kids makes it easier.
So your approach is like cutting out what is not necessary, like by elimination.
Yes, you see, I have love for the Algerian and all that stuff, but that's not it's not necessary if you look at the clinically Islamists.
So you're just saying that I have respect for my heritage, but that's not the focus here. The focus here is where we are, where we find ourselves, and it'll be easier.
Grandchildren and all that.
And the grandchildren. So it's easier for us to, if we just focus on where we are. Does anyone?
It's hard enough. It's already hard enough.
But so my question for you is then, okay, fine. How are you going to? I assume what you're saying is with your children and your grandchildren and their children and their children's children. I assume what you're saying is that you want Islam to be found with them.
Definitely.
And you assume that they're probably going to be Swedish or something like that. That's what you understand.
Like a world citizen or whatever.
Yeah, sure. So my question to you is, then how are you going to make sure that Islam is found there?
Like you said, like we have here, that they are taught the Islamic principles or the teachings, the connection with the book, Allah's book, and the Sunnah of Prophet ﷺ. That should be the main focus.
And has that always? And isn't that kind of probably what we'd find in each era? That's what people did. Probably. So it really isn't that big of a task, considering that's just what one does. But now that being the case, we say that, But for example, like Roda Institute, and this is not a sort of some kind of competition. Any institution that was able to do that, we have to support these institutions to be able to make sure that this happens. And we cannot assume that it's someone else's job. I mean, it is, if you don't have the knowledge and the experience, it is someone else's job in terms of education, but it's my job to help make sure that this happens. I have to be invested. I can't just send my kids to school on Sunday and be like, okay, you know, I did my job. No. It has to be in the home as well. It has to be, we have to support our institutions, and we have to have a continued, we have to keep the same energy and the same story in both places. So Quran, for example, obviously needs to be, you know, our life, our existence is in the Quran. And I don't mean to say that, you know, there's nothing else to look at but the Quran, because that's kind of a silly rendition of the tradition. It doesn't really work that way. But the Quran is the basis of everything. So that, you know, so I understand there's a Quran school here, for example. But how do we support the Quran school, and how do we support the education that comes along with Quranic teachings, the language, for example, that comes along with it, the understanding, the jurisprudence that comes along with it, all these things. But also, we also have to support healthy Swedish cultural activity. Now this is the part I was getting at. We have two jobs, I understand it, in the West, or the Northwest, extreme North. Like, we have two jobs to do. We have to promote positive. Look, what do we have? We have water, we have container. We have a job to maintain both. Otherwise, an empty bottle is not going to do anything for me, and a bottle with or water with no container is not going to help me. So I have to do both. That means I have to look after Sweden. I have to support a positive Sweden. I have to be involved. I have to be involved. I have to understand it. I have to know it. And this whole idea of, oh, those are kuffar. You're out of your mind. You're out of your mind. When you're walking down the street with someone, you're not walking down the street with a kafir. You're walking down the street with a Swede. You're out of your mind. I mean, I don't think anyone here thinks like that, but like to think like the whole, the sort of radicalization and all that kind of stuff. To me, I don't understand what happened here, other than it's just someone's not thinking straight. There's no common sense. When you're in the car, driving in the car in traffic, you're in the car with Swedes. You're working with Swedes. You go to school with Swedes. You're dying in the hospital with Swedes, because turns out you're a Swede. I remember the first time I came here. The first time I came here about some 9 years ago or whatever. I remember hearing something about some Somalis who were saying they were cussing the Swedes. We hate these people. We're not Swedish, and da 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 da. And the funniest thing was, they were saying it in Swedish, and I was like, okay. So it's like, anyway, I'm gonna kind of wrap this up because of time. I think, practically speaking, what you guys are doing with having your children in Quranic schools is a very, very good basis and needs to be promoted. And we need to have a problem at Roda and other places where there's not enough room. We need this problem so that it's growing. To maintain Islam in Sweden, we have to do this. But the second half of it is we also have to maintain positive Swedish cultural practices. Otherwise, we will not be able to maintain the container either. So we have to have balance. That's our job too. And you know what? If we were to help maintain positive Swedish sort of reinforcements in terms of culture, guess what happens with these other Swedes who don't get it? They start to get it. They start to understand. And you know what? I have been everywhere in this world. I'm telling you, humans are the same everywhere. Everybody wants good things. They want what's good. But if they don't know that it's good because they see you as other, they're not going to have access to it. And it's not fair for us to keep the best to ourselves because we're upset because they don't like us. No, that's not an excuse. That's not an excuse. So two things. As I've said, I don't want to keep reiterating finally, we have to, the thing, so the question was, and what are faith solutions in troubled times? And I guess troubled times means changing, like we have trouble that is changing. We have trouble that's changing. Look, the only, and I said this last night, and this is my final point, I'm gonna take the mic and you guys can't talk anymore because time is over. I was mentioning this last night. The only thing in this world, the only thing that we know, basically, that is unchangeable is Allah. He said, "Am I not your Lord?" And we all said, "Indeed," before even coming to this world. This world is constantly changing, and ironically, you could say the only thing that's permanent about this world is the fact that things are constantly changing, which is an interesting paradox, but that's a different story. Everywhere you look, everyone's trying to find permanence. Everybody wants permanence. They don't want to be happy, they want to be permanently happy. They don't want to be wealthy, they want to be permanently wealthy. They don't want to be off of work, they want to be permanently on vacation. Right? We want permanence. But there's no place in this world that even has the suggestion of permanence. Everything is the nature of the world is change. What is as a person who believes, as a believer, as an Islam person, what can I offer this world? I can by my example, by my children's example, by my institution's examples, I can say to them, you are looking for permanence in the wrong place. You are looking at you want permanence so bad, you'll kill yourself if you don't find it. Is that true or false? Absolutely. You will kill yourself if you don't find permanent happiness. But you're looking for it in the wrong place because this is the world of change. So we have to do our part with our children and with our society, reorientating towards that original question, am I not your Lord? And we have to find creative ways to do that sometimes. But the truth of the matter is, unless someone's going to reject it, and that's between them and God, it's already there. So we need to learn how to speak a language that everyone can understand, which simply and most appropriately, in the context that we find ourselves, which is Sweden, to convey the message, La ilaha illallah, Muhammad Rasulullah, and that does not mean we're anti-Swedish. In order for us to be La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah, we have to have Sweden. Islam is not an ideology. It's clear water that needs a container. Jazakallah khair. I don't want to. We can talk if you want to, but we'll have to do it after the.
You got the prayers and so many things.
Jazakallah khair.
Inshallah, allihopa är välkomna till